You are.
Yeah.
There's so many things to tell you about Fender that it's almost impossible to get it all in a half an hour or 20 minutes. I started working there in '53, and my father worked there before I did. And he worked in what they call a cabinet shop, where they made the amplifier boxes. And he was there probably for about a year, and he had a stroke. And within that year that he was working there, he had talked to a young man by the name of George Fullerton, and told him that his son was becoming of age, needs to find a job. You got anything for him? And he says, when he gets old enough to work, tell him to come in. Well, meanwhile, my father had the stroke, and we left California, went back to Connecticut for family reasons, and couldn't find any work over there. So I came back out here with my parents, and I walked from Anaheim to Fullerton and back of the post office. That's where they first started Fender. And I went up to a gentleman wearing an apron, asked him if he was doing any hiring. And he points to the guy with a white shirt working on a drill press. And who am I to know? I thought I would ask somebody that was working. I didn't know he was going to wear a white shirt. And I told him who I was and everything. And he says, well, I tell you what. He said, you come in on Monday, which was just had to go through the weekend, and we'll find something for you to do. And that's when I went to work for him. At Monday, I think it was May 17th, 1953. And
That was Leo in the white shirt?
that was George Fullerton,
Ah.
and which I hadn't met. And that's my first meeting with him. And I hadn't met Leo Fender till after about 8 months I'm working at the company down there. I see this guy walking by, but I don't know who he is. And they give you a short story. The funny thing about it was that when you were assigned on a certain job and you completed it for the day and you got done early, they would try to have you put your 8 hours in, so they would transfer you into another department. And one particular day I got transferred into the stock room, and the stock clerk told me that I had to deliver some boxes to the building number 1 for the assembly area. So I said, okay. So I get one of these dollies and hand truck, you want to call it, and I loaded up. And I loaded up pretty high, though it was kind of almost over my head. But as you pull down, you can see over it. And I got the thing loaded, and I told him I was going down building 1, and I go out the little door that's leading out of the warehouse, and I almost run over this guy. And he jumps and he steps back about 3 steps, and he says, don't you think you could probably handle that a little bit better if you didn't take quite as much? And in those days I was always hot and quick with my temper, and I said, if you think you can do better than me, why don't you just take it down to building 1? And the guy scratches his head and turns around and walks away. I get done building 1, come back up. Stock clerk says, what the heck did you do? I said, what? Don't you know that guy you were talking to, nasty, out there? That's Leo Fender. I said, well, I didn't know who he was. He was wearing his Hawaiian shirt and his little tools on the side of his belt, his screwdriver and pliers. I said, I didn't know who he was. And then it was a couple of days later, same thing. I ran out of work. They transferred me to the machine shop. So I'm working there on a drill press and drilling these holes on. There's somebody standing behind me. And I turn around and I says, haven't you got anything better to do besides stand there staring at me? He says, boy, you are a hot-tempered little cocky son of a gun, aren't you? And I said, I really don't mean to. I says, but it just comes out that way when somebody's staring at me. And we got along fine. He was just salt of the earth, that guy. He was really good. I was just young and didn't know any better. I was probably, that particular time, I was probably about 17 years old, and wasn't allowed to handle real heavy-duty equipment because of my age. So they put me on light duty in a drill press and pushing a broom and stuff like that. Besides, my regular job was hand sanding. And I used to sand all the guitar bodies that they put out, me and several other gentlemen. But working at Fender was a dream. It really was. It was a joy to get up in the morning and go to work. And I had 20 years in the place, and I still enjoyed all of that. All the years I worked there, I enjoyed every one of them. I enjoyed going to work. There was a lot of things that happened after they sold to CBS that shouldn't have happened, but they did happen. And it was just George Fulton was Leo Fender's right-hand man, and George was very good to all the employees. He made a point to make the rounds in the morning. He was director of manufacturing. Make the rounds in the morning and have a couple words with everybody, as individually. And then he would go on to do his daily work. And Leo Fender used to do the same thing. Come walking through the shop and he'd come up to me and say, "Hey, babe, how you doing?" And then I said, "Okay." He said, "Get that lawn put in yet at your house?" I said, "No, I'm working on it." He says, "I'll tell you how to do it so it won't be too much work for you." Stuff like that, He was just really good people. And the work was enjoyable and it was rewarding. I met a lot of people working there, and it's funny because I actually started working on the line as a hand sander, and I got my promotions. As years went by, I was in charge of the acoustic section for about a year, and then they had somebody from Dobro Guitars that wanted to work there, and mostly acoustic. And so I was replaced, and I got sent back to electric guitars. And I was in electric guitars for a few years, and then eventually I ended up product manager over the string instruments. And the people that I worked with on the line, side by side, were working under my directions now, and we got along just super. It was really great. I learned one thing, that you treat everybody as individuals. You don't treat them as a whole and put everything in one pot. You got to let the person do his own thing. And I used to get along really fine with them, every one of them. I felt bad when I left. I had a lot of tears. I had 20 years in there, and I worked for 20 different department heads over the years, and I was averaged out about one a year. Got to the point where I used to lay odds with them. Come in and introduce himself to me, and my new immediate, and I says, "Hi, I'm pleased to meet you." He says, "I understand you lay odds." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "How long do you think I'm going to be here?" I said, "Well, just off the top of my head, I say 18 months. And I think it was about 2 weeks off. He come in and saw me before he left, the last one. He says, "I can't believe you do that." He says, "That's the way it's been running here with CBS." And they had people like in quality control. They had, are you familiar with the name Bill Carson?
Yeah.
And what's he doing? Is he dead?
Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago.
I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry to hear that. He was in charge of the string line when I was still a snotty-nosed kid. And that's too bad. But he was in charge of quality control, and I was in charge of string instruments then, doing his job. But I don't know what his connection was in Mahogany Row or what. But he comes in one day and he's got a Telecaster. Well, the Telecaster, the pickups after they were wound, they wind them and then they seal them they wrap them with string and they seal them in wax with lamp black in it. Well, I eliminated the lamp black. You know what lamp black is?
No, tell me.
It's a pigment. If you take a piece of tin, and hold with the pliers and put a flame underneath it, and then he'd move the flame away and look at it. There's that black soot. To me, and you probably soot would be there to say what it is, but they call it lamp black, and you put that in the wax to color the wax so that when you seal it, the wax looks black. But it wasn't really a dense black, but showed some black. And he said the instrument never sounded good after that was done. He says it's the worst thing that ever happened, and they should fire the guy that did that. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to take it down there and take the string off and redo that pickup with lamp black. I said, okay. So instead of that, I called the supervisor over and said, here. And I gave him $5. I says, go down to the yardage store and get some black string and bring it back. So he went and brought it back. I said, wind that thing and put the clear wax on it, put it back in the instrument, set it up front. And there he was. He says, boy, this thing sounds good. It never sounded better in your life. He says, there's great tone to it. Listen to that. Look at that lamp black. That's what's doing it. Lamp black doesn't have any, it doesn't conduct electricity or anything. It's just a coloring. And I said, that's black string. Boy, he about wet his pants. He really got upset with me for doing that. I said, well, you told me you're going to throw me the hell out of here for doing something I thought was good, because that black stuff would get it all over the place. It was all over during the day. The girls would get on their hands and transmit it to something else, and oh boy. And so they started wrapping it with black string, and he thought that, he accepted it. He accepted it. And because on the telly, the one pickup where the bridge is at, and when they take the cover off on the body, you can see all that inside of there where the pickup's at, if you're familiar with it. And so it went lit. I don't know what they're doing now, if they're using lamp black again or what. But, and then I used to keep in touch with a lot of my people that I used to work with. And I get kind of nervous about looking them up anymore because, like I said, they've passed on. And but Leo Fender turned out one heck of an instrument, and it's the people that made it, the people that worked for him that really enjoyed working for him. And he didn't just treat me great; he treated everybody the same. Treated everybody good. I never heard him, George Fullerton or Leo Fender, use any profanity. I've never heard him chastising anybody, and never heard him talking hateful about anything or anybody. Just such great teachers of how to conduct yourself as a human being, and I don't think you find those people anymore. I don't know if you do. I've turned this operation I'm at right now into a one-man show. That way I don't have to deal with people that I don't like. And believe me, there's a lot of them out there. And
so you started in '53, so you were around when, were they already starting the Stratocaster at that point, or that came later?
I made many a Strats. No, that was, that probably, I just off the top of my head, it probably in the 60s. Probably the 60s.
And what about the precision bass? Did you have a...
I had a guy come in here on, you're talking about the square one? The one that looked like the telly?
Yeah.
Well, I had a guy from England come in and see me. In fact, there's if you want his name, it's on that cardboard up there on this shelf right over here. He sent me a letter, and the telly, the last 5 telly, let's take it back, precision bass the last 5, the square ones, might have been 6. We run off of that thing with a fiberboard pickguard on it. It didn't have the vinyl pickguard. It had a fiberboard. We used to sand them and lacquer those. And a little peanut that you thumb for your thumb.
Oh, yeah.
That was made out of wood back in the old days. Now they're plastic, I think. And that was, I think, I was hand sanding. I sanded the pickguards for him, and I sanded the last 5 or 6. And that's when he converted over to the new precision bass. And that was probably done in 55, probably during that time there. And we got the was a Fender Mustang.
Oh, yeah.
That was developed when I was there. And oh, you familiar with the student? The student.
Oh, yeah.
I used to get drunk working on that thing. I didn't know that what they would do is that they had the plastic that looked like mother of pearl. You remember that one?
Yeah, yeah.
And they would put it on they had like a tub, and they had acetone and stuff in it, and they apply a little bit of heat to it, and they take the plastic and set it over the chicken wire, and they get all limbered up, and that's just the way you would get too. And you take it and you lay it on the instrument and you stretch it around it. It just folds all around the thing, and then you cut the excess off the bottom. And then we used to have a little box that had a lot of felt in it, and they call it, I think they call it flux or something like that. And they would put that on the bottom side of it. And I think they made those in 53, 54, and I didn't see any more. That was it.
Really?
I don't. In fact, that was just, I wake up in the middle of the night doing guitars. And I remember when I first learned how to put the double neck string steel guitar, double neck. And I used to drill the hole half from one side and half from the other side and bolt the thing together. And I remember doing those. And we didn't do too many of them. We didn't do too many at all. We just started going into the single neck stuff. And I remember that, familiar with that plexiglass steel guitar that Alvino Ray played?
Oh, yeah.
I made that.
No kidding. I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was really sweating bullets when I was doing it too, because that piece of plexiglass is pretty expensive. And I just did the cutting on it, and it was sent someplace else to be buffed out. But that never did function. They dubbed in the sound.
Oh, is that right?
That's what they told me.
Really?
They tried to get it to work, but it didn't. They say it was completely different than working with wood. So, how about the Paisley? Paisley? Familiar with the Paisley?
Oh, yeah, right.
They couldn't get the stuff to stick. What they would do is put it was wallpaper. They put it on the instrument with lacquer. They put a coat of lacquer on it and put the paper over it and let it dry so it adheres to the. And guess what happens when you put another coat over it? It reactivates what's underneath it because it goes right through the paper and come off again. I took care of that problem for them. On the acoustic guitars, they used to have a fracture that came in the neck slot. That was one of my easiest fixes I ever done for the instrument. And Roger Rossmeyer was the one who designed that acoustic for Leo. And he when I was put in charge of the acoustics, I kind of left him out in the cold. And he got really upset when I fixed the block that the neck screwed down to. And all I did was take a broom handle and cut it the thickness of the instrument and drill the hole the same size and then inserted it in that block so that when you put the 4 screws into the neck, it didn't squish the spruce block. And you couldn't believe that fixed it, but it fixed it. Well, he started doing all the ones that way. But he got mad at me for doing that. Oh, he got terribly mad at me. And he ended up. I had to go over to the main plant one day, and when I took over the acoustic department, they already had all these people hired in. They're already hired in. I didn't have nothing to do with them, except introduce myself as their leader. And I had to go to the main plant, and I was gone for about like 6 hours, and I came back, and all my people were drunk. He went out and bought a couple cases of beer. I don't believe this. What are you doing to me? And I just told him, I said, everybody clock out and go home. See you tomorrow, hopefully. And we had a pretty good rapport after that. I guess he got personally involved with everybody. Like he used to loan him money and buy him beer on Fridays and stuff like that. Well, I couldn't do that because I was representing Leo, you know. And I didn't want to make things bad for him. And everything turned out pretty good. And by the time the guy from Dobro came down, everything was going pretty good. But Ross Meisel used to go in the finish department, and every time he saw a flaw in one of the instruments, he would take a pencil and put a little mark by it. Well, the painters come in the morning. They don't think that Ross Meisel's going through their stuff in the finish department. You know, it's already got maybe a coat of paint on it. And they start spraying him. We end up with pencil marks on the finish. And I said, oh, I don't believe this. Who's doing this? And he admitted to doing it, but we had to end up stripping a bunch of stuff. And if you remember the Wildwood acoustic?
Oh, yeah.
The guy that worked in that department, I didn't know it, but he was colorblind. That's why we had some come out with mixed match colors. And it was one day we were sitting there, and he just kind of told me what his problem was, and I finally realized it because I used to get him in his case almost every day, like, why didn't you put this color with that color? What's the matter with you? And I found out he was colorblind. But we also used to do the Coronado. Coronado was not good. Didn't work out well at all. And we put the binding on it, and come back in the morning and take all the wrapping off and the binding be on there. And we take our scrapers and scrape the binding down so it fits in. And 2 days later, the binding would be pulling off. It just started to release itself. And I kept on telling Forrest White, because I used to have to answer to him. I said, I can't work with this stuff. He said, does it stay on there? The glue's no good, or the vinyl's no good. He says, that's what you got to work with it. So I took it upon myself to write a letter to the company that supplied us with the material. And I said, you're using the wrong material. The guy who manufactures it tells me I'm using the wrong material. He said, the material is made for signs. It expands and contracts according to the weather. He says, you'll never get it to stick. And that's why we changed. But I couldn't get that until I stuck that letter in front of his nose. He wouldn't let me change.
I wanted to ask you about when you started with Music Man. About what year was that?
I think it was 83.
Okay. What was that like?
No, wait a minute. Probably 74. What was that like? I'm not sure if it was 74. I had 11 years then.
Okay.
I worked there for 11 years. I was thinking about those. He's going to start asking me dates.
Well, I just wanted a rough guess.
What it was like working there? It was okay at first. And it was just, I reported to Forrest. he was in charge in the production area.
Tell me about the string box.
Oh, the string boxes. When they asked me to build those things, that I got one of my supervisors together, and we just sat down, designed it, and set it up so that it would do what they wanted to do. And I told them that it was costing them as much to build that little string box than it would to be build a 212 cabinet, including covering, because they had me spraying them. I was doing the spraying on the string boxes, and I was putting on anywhere from 2 to 6 coats, depending on how bad the wood was. But Frank, he was always coming up with some kind of an idea, and I built him those drum pads we're talking about, and I also built a couple wooden guitar racks for a single instrument. And he just always has some kind of an idea. I did some, he introduced me to some man up in Hesperia, I think up in that area, that builds amplifiers. I don't remember the name of it, but I built a whole bunch of cabinets. I brought my nephew in, and when I was in business for myself, I was able to do that, and we built probably 500 or 600 cabinets for their amplifiers. But I haven't seen Frank in a long time. I get concerned of how he's feeling.
Yeah, I think he's doing pretty good, actually.
Well, that's good. And is there anything else we can talk about?
You have a great history. I'm really glad to hear some of your stories, babe.
Well, there's so much garbage that you run into over the years. And I mean, some of the stories don't need to be told, but I think if there's ever going to write another book about Fender or Music Man, that they should involve other people besides me. I'd love to be in a new book if they would get it, but I would like to bring with me some of the people, have them recognized as craftsmen that worked at these places with me, that dedicated their all 100%, 200% effort. I used to have a guy from Rickenbacker working for me. He's, I believe his name of his group was the Chantays. He wrote Pipeline.
Oh, yeah.
And they worked with me on the guitar line at Music Man. It was just good people, really good people. I have another gentleman that used to work in the cabinet department covering, and salt of the earth. The guy could build anything. And he's working for a company now making soup. So, you know, we fits, no matter where he goes, the guy does 100%. And that's the way it is with a lot of those people. I just ran into a young girl that when she first started working for me, she was 18. And her aunt worked for me and trained her on a line doing chassis, circuit boards, soldering on the circuit boards. And I just ran to her. She's in her late 40s now. You know, she's not a kid anymore. Made me feel good, yeah. Now I know why my back hurts.
How did you get the nickname Babe?
Oh, that's another long story. I'll try to make it short. My oldest sister was married and had her child, lived in the same house as my family, my parents. And then I was born 2 years after my nephew was born. And he was junior. He was named after his father. Then I was junior, named after my father, because I was the only boy. And they got two juniors going around, and nobody knew who got called. So my mother used to call me the Bambino. And everybody said, "What's Bambino? What's Bambino?" And my sisters would tell them, "It's Babe." So that's what it got changed from Bambino to Babe. Which is best anyways, because just knowing that I don't know why some people figure Italians are all cutthroats. They're not. You know, we're not always all that way. But as soon as you tell them you're Italian, right away they think, oh man, ugh. You know, they try to play low key it, you know. And we're a lot of happy people. I just was hot tempered. And you know, I take after my father. He was that way. I had the raise the eyebrow kind of stare thing, and my intentions were not to intimidate anybody. But sometimes it was better to do that than intimidate them purposely. But so that's why I ended up with that name. When I went to school, I didn't use Babe. I had to use my regular name. And
Which is what?
Virgilio. Virgilio is my father's name. Virgilio is my youngest son's middle name. I would not let anybody go out of the family without having that.